The glass slipped from his trembling hands and shattered across the polished marble floor, the sound echoing far louder than it should have in a room filled with laughter and clinking silverware. For a brief, suffocating moment, everything went silent. Every eye turned toward the aging waiter standing frozen in the middle of the upscale restaurant, his face pale, his shoulders hunched, as if he had already accepted the storm that was about to fall on him. But the storm never came, because across the room, a man in a perfectly tailored suit had just risen from his seat, his expression not angry, not annoyed, but stunned. Completely, utterly stunned, and what happened next would change both of their lives forever. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of doing good even when no one is watching, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest acts can echo across decades. The waiter's name was Horace Kadri, a man worn down by time, responsibility, and sacrifices no one ever saw. His hair, once thick and black, had faded into streaks of gray. His hands, though steady for years, had begun to betray him lately, tiny tremors that grew worse after long shifts. His uniform, though clean, had been mended so many times that the stitching told its own story of struggle. Horace wasn't supposed to be here, not at his age, not after everything he had endured. But life rarely asked for permission before placing burdens on a man's shoulders. Every morning began the same way. Before the sun could fully stretch its golden fingers across the city, Horace was already awake. He would quietly prepare breakfast in the small apartment he shared with his 7-year-old daughter, Meher. Her laughter, her sleepy smiles, and the way she clung to him were the only reasons he kept going. Her mother had passed away years ago, taken too soon by an illness that drained not only their savings but also the light from Horace's life. Since then, he had become everything: father, mother, protector, provider. And though he never complained, the weight of it all had carved deep lines into his face. The restaurant was his lifeline. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to cover rent, school fees, and the occasional treat for Meher, a chocolate bar, a coloring book, or a small toy she would treasure like gold. Yet today felt different. There was something heavy in the air, something unspoken. The restaurant buzzed with the usual lunch crowd, business executives, tourists, couples celebrating quiet moments. Among them sat a man who didn't belong to Horace's world anymore. A man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and headlines alike: Ryan Zorvath. A billionaire known for his empire of tech innovations and philanthropic ventures, Ryan carried an aura of quiet authority. But beneath the composed exterior was a past he rarely spoke about, a past that had once brought him to the brink of death, and as he glanced around the restaurant, something caught his eye. A movement. A face. A memory. Horace had just approached the table with a tray of drinks when his hand faltered. The glass slipped. The crash followed, and in that split second, their worlds collided again. Ryan stepped forward slowly, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He stared at the men before him, searching through the layers of age and hardship, trying to confirm what his instincts were screaming. It couldn't be, and yet, it was. 20 years ago, Ryan had been nothing more than a frightened teenager running from a life he couldn't escape. He had no money, no family to turn to, and no idea where his next meal would come from. That night, cold and desperate, he had collapsed in an alley behind a small roadside cafe. Most people would have walked past him, but not Horace. Back then, Horace had been younger, stronger, working double shifts just to build a modest future with his wife. When he found the unconscious boy, he didn't hesitate. He carried him inside, cleaned his wounds, and fed him with what little he had. 4 days, he cared for him. No questions. No expectations, just kindness. He had given Ryan more than food and shelter. He had given him a chance, and now, standing in that luxurious restaurant decades later, Ryan realized something that sent a chill down his spine. The man who had once saved his life was now struggling just to survive his own. Horace, unaware of who stood before him, immediately bent down to clean the shattered glass, murmuring apologies. His voice carried a quiet desperation, the kind that comes from knowing mistakes can cost you everything. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said softly, avoiding eye contact. But Ryan didn't respond right away. Instead, he crouched down beside him. That alone shocked everyone in the room. A billionaire, kneeling on the floor, beside a waiter. Horace. Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper, thick with emotion he couldn't contain. The older man froze. No one had called him by his name like that in years, not with that familiarity, that warmth. He slowly looked up, their eyes met, and in that instant, recognition struck like lightning. Horace's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, flipping through memories buried deep beneath years of struggle. "Ryan," he said, his voice trembling. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies often portray reunions. There were no grand speeches or immediate tears, just silence, heavy, meaningful silence filled with everything they couldn't yet say. Ryan helped him stand, gently brushing off the dust from his uniform as if he were handling something precious. "You saved me," Ryan said, his voice steady now but filled with gratitude that had waited 2 decades to be spoken. "I never forgot. Not for a single day." Horace shook his head, almost embarrassed. "I only did what anyone would do." But Ryan knew better. Not everyone would. That simple act of kindness had shaped his entire life. Without Horace, there would be no empire, no success, no second chance, and now, it was his turn. What happened next didn't unfold overnight. There was no sudden transformation, no instant miracle. Instead, it began quietly. Ryan asked Horace to sit with him after his shift. They talked for hours, about life, loss, struggles, and the years that had passed like pages in a book neither of them expected to revisit. Horace spoke of Meher, his voice softening every time he mentioned her name. He spoke of sleepless nights, of worries he never shared, of dreams he had long since buried. Ryan listened, really listened, and that made all the difference. Over the next few days, something remarkable began to take shape. Ryan visited the restaurant again. And again, not as a customer, but as someone reconnecting with a piece of his soul. Then one morning, he did something that stunned even his closest advisors. He bought the restaurant, but not for himself, for Horace. When Horace received the news, he thought it was a mistake. There was no way something like that could happen to someone like him, but it was real, every bit of it. The man who once had nothing was now the owner of the very place he had spent years serving others, and that wasn't all. Ryan ensured that Meher received the best education possible. He arranged for their apartment to be replaced with a comfortable home filled with light, warmth, and the promise of a better future. But more than the financial help, what Horace received was something far more valuable: dignity, hope, and the overwhelming realization that kindness never truly disappears. It waits, it grows, and one day, it finds its way back. Years later, the restaurant became known not just for its food, but for its story. People came from far and wide to see the place where a simple act of humanity had come full circle. Horace, now standing tall behind the counter instead of bending under trays, never forgot where he came from. He treated every employee with respect, every customer with warmth, and every struggling soul with the same compassion he had once shown a lost boy in an alley. And Ryan, he never stopped visiting, not as a billionaire, but as someone who never forgot the night his life was saved by a stranger who chose kindness over indifference. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the smallest good deed can change a life forever, take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your support helps spread stories that truly matter. Before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where kindness changed your life? Because sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come from wealth or power, they come from people who choose to care. And in a world that often forgets, stories like this remind us that humanity is still alive, and stronger than ever.